Is California turning its back on the rooftop solar industry? Before, when you would buy solar panels, the law was in a way that when you would generate electricity, you could sell it back to the utility company at the same rate you were buying energy from them. But in 2023, everything changed. The rate that the utility companies buy from the rooftop solar owners dropped significantly by 75%, making it financially almost impossible for solar to make sense. There's one group that is suing the Public Utility Commission, arguing that the rooftop solar is very efficient and it provides a lot of value. Today, we sit down with experts from the industry, and they tell us what's happening.
We saw the market drop 80% overnight. It has come up a tiny bit, but is mostly flatlined. Just fewer and fewer people are going solar. We saw 17,000 solar jobs lost within the first year of that program going into effect.
I'm Siyamak. Welcome to California Insider. Bernadette, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Johnny, it's great to have you back. Welcome back.
Thanks.
We want to talk to you about the solar industry in California. You guys think the solar industry in California is not treated fairly. Can you tell us what's going on?
Yeah, I would say that consumers, over 2 million Californians who have adopted rooftop solar, are not being treated fairly, and that the state is not properly valuing all of the benefits that come from people putting solar panels on their roof. And when I say people, I mean middle income, low income. I'm talking IKEA and Walmart. Almost everybody with a roof and a patch of sunshine is able to go solar, and we have over 2 million people that have done so thus far. It's had a huge impact on California's environment, on the stability of our electric grid, on keeping prices from being even higher than they currently are. And the state has kind of played this massive role in fomenting this incredible new industry, has now turned its back on it and is treating it quite badly.
Can you explain what exactly happened that makes rooftop solar less attractive? What did the state do that?
The first thing that the state did was in 2023, the state made a very drastic change to this program called net metering. So if you're not familiar with net metering, it's an incentive program that's designed to make that upfront cost that you invest in your rooftop solar panels pay for itself more quickly. And that does that by allowing you to generate electricity in real time that you use right there in your home, right when the sun is shining. And then the other electrons that may be in excess of what you need at that exact moment, you get to spin your meter backwards and get a bill credit. So what this big change in net metering did in 2023 is it said, you can still self-consume, you can still generate your own electricity, but if you send anything back to the electric grid, it's worth next to nothing. It's really like we discounted it 80% overnight. And that's about half the value of your solar system. You use about half of your electricity in real time, the other half gets sent back to the grid. Importantly, it is shared with your neighbor who uses it immediately. In fact, California's net metering program is the largest neighborhood sharing solar market in the world. It's really phenomenal how we're able to share electrons amongst ourselves without the need for all of these expensive and dangerous grid power lines that go across our landscape and spark wildfires and other things. When we have it down in our neighborhood, we can just share it. So it's this wonderful win-win program, or was, but the state drastically cut the value of that export, which just overnight made the cost of going solar more expensive. It is still actually smart for consumers to go solar, even in this current climate in California, because the cost of grid supplied electricity keeps going up. When you buy your own solar panels or you finance them through a third company, you're locking in electricity that's never going to change the price. You're locking it in for 20 to 30 years. So it's still a really good investment.
Before the solar, people that bought rooftop solar, they actually would supply the utility companies and the neighbors at the same rate that they were charged, right?
Yeah.
How much was it before and how much is it now?
It was about 25 cents on average per kilowatt hour. And then it got changed to sub 5 cents. So it went drastically down overnight. And then as rates go up, so right now that was 25 cents in 2023, rates are now closer to 35 cents, but it's still only worth 5 cents. In fact, the state, every time they've revisited the value of that exported energy, they give it another haircut, which is really kind of defies gravity, right? The price of electricity, the cost of electricity keeps going up, and yet somehow the state keeps valuing that exported electron shared between neighbors at a lower and lower rate.
As someone reporting on California's economy and policies every week, unfortunately, I see the middle class shrinking in California. Some of it has to do with our policies, and there is another side to this that we are facing major inflation here and across the country. Unfortunately, the dollar has lost 10% of its value just this year to date. That's why more and more people are turning to real assets to protect their financial future, like physical gold and silver from American Hardfold Gold. Unlike paper assets, these tangible investments can't be controlled or devalued by inflation or bad policies. You can have them delivered straight to your home or securely stored in a tax-advantaged gold IRA, giving you a safe, reliable way to safeguard your wealth, no matter what happens in California or the rest of the country. American Hardfold Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of 5-star reviews. And right now, when you call, you can get up to $15,000 in free silver with your first purchase. Call 866-595-2304. That's 866-595-2304, or text Cali to 65532. Make sure to text Cali to 65532. What's the impact when you're talking to consumers?
It's a really interesting situation where if you were to go back in time, 4 or 5 years ago, somebody would have been a bit more skeptical about solar because their utility cost wasn't high. It's a pain versus solution situation. And so as people's pain is starting to increase, which we're seeing right alongside with these utilities, there is a desperation to get solar. But where we were able to install projects in a matter of less than 2 months, even going through the permits and all of that, it's becoming more difficult on my end to be able to secure financiers to finance these projects in a way that's customer friendly. It's becoming more difficult to source material and source product with every new regulation and hurdle that comes our way. And so the consumer is waiting longer and longer timelines to get their solar solution done for their properties. And all the while, they're getting charged more and more by those utility companies. And these are costs that they just can't get away from. You can't stop using electricity.
When you were working with customers, people that are buying rooftop solar, before you would make the case for them that their utility bills would go to essentially zero, right, or very low. Right. Now it's like half. How much is it now?
We've had to adapt, right? So what's happened after that 2023 change happened with net metering is we scrambled to source batteries, because rather than sharing those electrons now with your neighbors, people are essentially hoarding them into a battery. And those batteries aren't cheap, and they usually don't have the same lifespan as the solar panels do. The battery lifespan is generally anywhere from 10 to 17 years approximately, but the solar panels can last anywhere from 30 to 40 years in the right conditions and in the right weather. And so what we've had to do is we've had this supply chain shock that really affected us, where for almost 8 months, almost a full year, it took us to secure financing for both batteries and solar. And that was a tricky situation that led to huge layoffs, even in my own company. My own company, we had to do over 70% layoffs, because in the new jobs, we were like, we don't want to just put rooftop solar up on the roof, and then the homeowner is now in trouble because they're putting power back on the grid that they used to get a great credit for, a fair credit. And that credit is now being whittled down to, sub 5 cents. That means they have to put 5 kilowatts back on the grid to get the 1 kilowatt credit, when it used to be a near 1-for-1. And the funny and odd thing about this is, and to share with what Bernadette was explaining, is that they didn't have to ship that power huge distances from another power plant. Right? You're talking some power made up on the roof, going 10 to 15 feet over to the neighbors nearby who are in need of it. And we've heard the beat of the drum over and over again from the utilities that we have a shortage of electricity, that we need more power sources, that these are the things that we need. And now we don't do a solar project without coupling it with batteries now, and we can't. And otherwise we put our homeowners and our businesses in a compromised position, because they're now essentially giving that power away for free, getting nothing in the form of a credit, and then getting a large, what's called a true-up bill at the end of that year, where as the year is marching on, the bill at the end of the year that they're going to own to the utility becomes larger and larger, often thousands of dollars.
This is a really important point. We're at a point in time in 2025 where California and all across the country, regulators are wringing their hands over how are we going to power the data centers, the AI centers, how are we going to power all the electric cars. Let's build a bigger grid, right? California just passed a series of bills this year to subsidize and use taxpayer dollars to help build a bigger grid, to build more power plants far away from Los Angeles and other the cities where we live, all to power this growth in electricity. And yet at the same time, we're stifling the most cost-effective thing that we can do, which is just cover all of the rooftops of Los Angeles, all of the rooftops of Orange County, all throughout the state of California with solar panels. If we did that, we could reduce the overall cost of what it's going to take to power California with electricity and share those benefits with everybody, not to mention have a lighter footprint on the environment.
There was an argument that when utility companies are buying this power, it's not worth the same because they have a lot of solar during the day and there is some in the transmission cost because the utilities do the transmission. What are your thoughts on that?
It's just bad math. I mean, how is it rational that the company can sell electricity at 25, 35, sometimes 50 cents a kilowatt hour at that exact point in time of the day? How is it worth that much to them and justified to spend that much and charge that much? But when you get it for free for doing nothing and it just flows to the next door neighbor and you charge the next door neighbor at 35, 45, 50 cents, how is it rational that it's only worth 5? That makes no sense at all. No, electricity is really expensive because the utilities are spending a lot of money delivering electrons to our homes. It's an incredibly expensive system to build and maintain these power lines, especially in today's modern climate where we have a lot of climate disasters. It makes it even more expensive and precarious. So the more cost-effective thing is to not use wires at all and generate electricity where we use it, where we live and pray and worship and play. But that doesn't really work with the system if your whole way of making money is to build a bigger and bigger grid. And so it cuts against that. But there's just no rational economic logic to the idea that the utility can charge 50 cents for something that they then turn around and say is only worth 5.
You mentioned that there were investors before. Were there investor groups that would invest on these rooftop solars?
Yeah, we want to make it as available to everyone as possible. And when you come to somebody and tell them that they would have to spend $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 up front on solar, there used to be some attraction to that because you would get a large tax credit for that. But most people, that's prohibitive, right? Our goal is to make these as accessible as possible. Our goal is to generally create a new monthly bill that's less than what they're paying to the utility. And that was really common. I mean, it's very common for us to cut a utility bill in half. Somebody has a $400 electric bill. With our financing availabilities that we've had over the years, we could make that $200 a month. They would get rooftop solar, and maybe for $250 a month, including a battery, is what we kind of adapted to, right? So it cut into the savings a little bit. But again, the utilities increase their rates too, so our cost of batteries has kind of been balanced out in a way with just the rate increases that we've seen side by side. But when we have tax incentives and great programs that are pro-microgrids, pro-localized power, that's very attractive to investors. And a lot of institutional capital helps us finance those projects where we can say, hey, it's not going to cost you a dime to go solar out of pocket. We'll do all the construction, we'll do the installation, we'll even maintain the system for 25 plus years. And then we're just going to replace it with this lower bill. But with the constant shifting in both tariffs and regulations and incentive programs, and also the lengthening sometimes of these installation projects, investors have been a little bit more afraid. Investors like stability. They want to know that what they're investing in, whether it be a large solar plant or an individual small solar project on the local level, that those investments aren't going to be subject to constant change. They want to know what those are going to be. And so that's where we've seen a lot of bankruptcies even on the financial front of these solar companies that were reliant on these different institutions to provide them financing for their projects to make it consumer friendly. That's where the big problems have happened. And that's where we've seen a lot of challenges, because as the days go on and the regulations get more and more tricky to manage, it's harder and harder for us to drum up the capital, and these banks are becoming even more scrupulous about who they're willing to do projects with. It used to be very easy to get a single mom with a semi-decent credit score a great deal, because we would look at that person and we'd go, hey, her utility bill was $400 a month. She almost never missed her electric bill. She always pays it on time. Despite whatever her credit conditions are, we're now making that $250 a month. What are the odds that she's going to default on that? Well, she's been paying $400 a month, $400 a month over the years. The odds of her defaulting on something that's now $250 a month, a lot less. But now these banks are becoming more and more scrupulous and scared, because they are worried that if they lend to the wrong projects, that those incentives that used to be there will no longer be available.
You guys are fighting this now, right? You're trying to make changes to these rules that were made. Can you tell us more about that?
My organization, along with two others, so my organization, Environmental Working Group, we've joined with two other groups. One is called Center for Biological Diversity, and the other is Protect Our Communities Foundation out of San Diego. The three of us have sued the state of California over this 2023 decision. What our lawsuit basically claims is that the state violated the law. The Public Utilities Commission, which is a state agency that regulates the utilities, they violated state law when they adopted this really draconian change in the way the state did this net metering program. And it just basically flew in the face of what state law says. State law says you need to properly value and estimate what is the value of all of this rooftop solar. What is it really providing to all ratepayers and to the state of California? And the law says you need to make sure that rooftop solar continues to grow. In any kind of successor program, if you make little changes, whatever change you make, you need to make sure that this important product, this important consumer choice, continues to grow. And it's quite obvious that the Public Utilities Commission got it very wrong. We saw the market drop 80% overnight. It has come up a tiny bit, but is mostly flatlined. Just fewer and fewer people are going solar. We saw 17,000 solar jobs lost within the first year of that program going into effect, and a lot of bankruptcies. Now, a lot of companies are still in business, and they're still making a go of it, in large part because California's electricity rates keep going up, and consumers are just so desperate for a way out that there's always going to be, I think, unless we do something like tax solar panels, there's always going to be a market for rooftop solar, but it's just fewer and fewer people are getting to do it than what we were headed before.
Is there any thoughts on taxing solar panels?
There have been several proposals. In fact, the very first proposal coming from the Newsom administration was to tax solar panels. For every panel you have on your roof, the state of California proposed charging you a fee. That fee would go straight into the pockets of the utility company, and it literally was to go to pay for the electricity you did not buy from them. That was the logic, that you owe your utility company a certain amount of money because they think you should buy their product. And so we're going to claw back your savings and tax every solar panel. We fought that and gave it our all, and we won, but it has resurfaced. It has showed up in the budget in the state of California every year since, and each year we have to fight it in the legislature. It's a really dangerous idea, and we're seeing it crop up in states all across the country where they're taxing solar panels, or they're throwing up this idea of a fee, a set fee that you owe the utility for the energy you do not consume. It's an incredibly dangerous idea and very uncompetitive.
Is it because they actually provide the night part? Because the night part is actually a service, because a lot of these people that generate solar during the day, they don't have the night part.
No, because when people buy electricity at night, they're still paying the utility for it. So people that have rooftop solar are still spending $100+ a month on their utility bill to cover when they purchase electricity at night. The thing, though, that's so important to understand is electricity in the winter and electricity at night is really actually pretty cheap. We have an abundance of energy in the nighttime and in the winter because we build California's electric grid for the hot summer. We build it for when our air conditioning load is at its highest. So it's like we build this gigantic capacity that can fit a lot of electricity usage, and then that capacity goes unused in the night or in the winter. So electricity prices are really cheap. So getting people to reduce their use in the middle of the day on a hot summer day, but still use the grid at night, that's a really good thing. That's basically, we want to have people do that, more of that. We encourage people to charge their electric car at night, for example. We in fact give them a subsidized, cheaper rate than what the regular going rate is to try to encourage them to use more electricity at night. That's because we have an abundance at night. So it's a false critique of rooftop solar. It's an easy one for the utilities to perpetuate of, oh, you're not paying your fair share, but completely devoid of the reality, which is these rooftop solar customers are doing everybody a service by reducing demand during these peak hours on hot summer days.
In terms of what you see on the ground, do people still, after these changes, are people still buying?
Oh, absolutely. It's been a matter of retaining staff under these difficult conditions and to be able to provide those deliverables that we find our biggest challenges come into play, where we have people that are either in the sales portion of the business or they're on the installation part, or they're waiting months and months going through all sorts of either regulations, product sourcing, or proving that their content is domestically made that make it very difficult for us to get financing on these projects. And when you make it go 6-7 months from the time of somebody signing an agreement going, hey, I want solar, to now it's getting installed, there's a lot of projects that drop off during that period of time. And so because of that, it makes it more financially difficult for people to operate in this space. And many of them have just left to other industries or other states where the competitive aspect is still available for them. And so our consumers are absolutely in a place where they're like, I need this. I see it all the time, even homes that already have. In 2020, there was that law passed that required a certain number of solar panels for new construction. A lot of those homes, too, are in a really difficult place because they need a secondary system to add to take care of the rest of their electric bill. And we have to wait quite a bit of time to get those installed. So it's just we're making our consumers hold their breath for a lot longer than they're used to. And when people are unfamiliar with how a technology works, which is why I'm excited we get opportunities like this to discuss to your audience, a lot of the times they just give up on a project, or maybe they even move, or something along those lines happens, and cancellations will tend to go up during those times. But we've also had a lot of consumers that are amazing, that are just die hard. They're like, nope, we want this solar project. I've had consumers wait, especially during that 2023 change that happened. I had several, I'm not even kidding, several dozen consumers wait over a year before we were able to get their solar projects accomplished. And so we have a huge public support. There is a public demand. The vast majority of people want this. It's just, can we get it to them in a timely fashion?
In terms of the lawsuit, so you guys are trying to challenge the rates, right? You think the rates are not fair.
Yeah.
That the utility companies are buying at 5 cents now before they used to buy at the rate they were selling. Where is it going now?
So we just won our case at the state Supreme Court. So we argued that the lower court that disagreed with us, that originally agreed with the state and with the utilities, that they made a mistake. And we appealed to the state Supreme Court. In August of 2025, the state Supreme Court agreed with us and said, you're right, you were not treated correctly. This was not reviewed properly by the Court of Appeal, and they overturned the Court of Appeal's decision. We now are back before the Court of Appeal to make our case again. And the difference now is there's a different, what's called standard of review. So there's a different sort of way in which the court is now required to evaluate our case. Prior to this state Supreme Court decision in August, the courts in California were very deferential to the agency that made this decision, the Public Utilities Commission that regulates our electric utilities. They were very hands-off in essence.
So if they made a decision, then they would say, this is the right thing.
This is that you guys are the experts. We'll let you kind of just do your own thing. And the legislature in California in 1998 passed a law right on the heels of deregulation. The legislature wisely said, you know what, if we deregulate and we open up all of this competition to California's electricity markets, because remember, prior to 1998 and prior to the mid-1990s, the utilities had a vertical monopoly. They owned the power plants, they owned the power lines, and then they sold to the customer. It was a vertical monopoly. In the mid-90s, we decided to deregulate the electricity market so that the utilities sold off all of their power plants and they no longer generated, for the most part, their own electrons. They bought their electrons from other companies, and then they delivered the electrons through the poles and wires, and that's how they made their money, and that's the system we have today. So the legislature in 1998 said, if we're going to introduce all of this competition and all of these other players into the market, we better strengthen legal review of this agency, because this agency is going to be in a pressure cooker like never before, right? Competing against these power plant producers plus the utility themselves, and the consumer might not get a fair shake. So legislature passed a law in 1998 that strengthened legal review of Public Utility Commission decisions, but that did not really take hold in the courts for 20 years. That law did not really properly influence the way the judges reviewed Public Utility Commission cases until our case came along. And we fought hard enough, and we said the standard of review is wrong. Look at this 1998 law. And the Supreme Court said, you're right, we've gotten it wrong for 20 years, and we're now correcting. So it's really kind of amazing that this sort of disruptive technology of rooftop solar is doing more than just disrupting energy. It's actually kind of disrupting the whole legal review system and process, which consumers are going to benefit even beyond, above and beyond rooftop solar in this case.
How long does it take for this to go to the next step? Do you think you guys have a chance of winning, and how long does it take?
Oh, we are very optimistic that we're going to win, and we're going to fight until we win, and we'll keep appealing if that's what it takes, because we know we're right on this. We know what the legislature intended when it passed a law in 2013 telling the Public Utilities Commission to keep rooftop solar growing. We know we have 50 years of California legislative history wanting to see people use more rooftop solar because it is good for the grid, it's good for consumers, it's good for the environment, it's good for the economy. So we know we're going to win, but our legal processes are very slow, right? So we have written briefs that are due to the Court of Appeal in November of 2025 and December, and then we hope to have a decision from the Court of Appeal sometime in 2026. And we'll go from there.
What would be that decision if it's a win for you guys? Would it go back to how it used to be? The rates would go back to what people are buying from the utility companies that will sell at the same rate?
Yeah, I think that would have to be an interim step, is that we'd go back to that previous net metering program. And then the Public Utilities Commission would be required to go back and revisit this decision. Where did they get it wrong? How did they do the wrong kind of analysis? Where did they get the numbers wrong when they came up with this 5 cents? They would need to go back and do a more accurate assessment of the value of rooftop solar and come up with a more accurate and fair number for when people send energy back to the grid.
Johnny, we heard some pushback from some consumers that they don't like the subsidies. They don't like to subsidize different industries, and solar industry has got a lot of subsidies. Can you guys survive without the subsidies?
Yeah, of course we can. I mean, there was a time period in which the innovation of these solar panels really was improving massively, and they have. And now we can do projects where your average panel is producing a huge amount of electricity versus even what it was 10, 15 years ago. And so, yes, it can survive without these subsidies, but subsidies generally go towards initiatives that the government and targets want to hit on their own without relying entirely on the public sector to support that. And what I mean by this is really simple. These investments that are happening in our grid are actually happening at the consumer level. If you as a consumer are going to improve the quality of our grid, you deserve a tax break for that. And that's what these are. These are tax breaks for the consumer. And so I'm very pro tax breaks. I love when the consumer actually gets a victory, because so many of our tax breaks happen usually at the highest levels. And to say that our utilities aren't subsidized would just be a really off critique. Our utilities are subsidized through all sorts of programs and all sorts of things, whether it be use of public lands, whether it be subsidy just by the very nature of how their business is set up to operate. There are plenty of subsidies that go towards them, but when you as a consumer get the chance to be able to get a tax break because you helped improve the quality of grid for not only your home but the surrounding homes in your neighborhood, you deserve that tax break. That's all it is. It's just a tax credit. So if you weren't even paying those taxes, a lot of the times you don't get those credits. So any consumer that goes, hey, this shouldn't be subsidized, it's like, look, this is just to help you. Like, this is a tax break that goes to your pocket, your family. I've seen homeowners that are excited about that. I have never had a single project that we've done in the last 8 years where I've had a consumer call me up and go, Johnny, I'm really upset about that tax credit I got. I wanted to pay more in taxes. And what I would say to them is go ahead. If there is that small 1% that has a problem with the tax credit, they can just donate it to their local church or whatever they want to donate it to. But at the end of the day, I'm very pro tax credits for our middle class and our lower middle class that really depend on those. I mean, a 30% tax credit was amazing. It was incredible. I mean, people got to be able to get a lot of the times large refund checks back on what they had overpaid in taxes, or just watch huge parts of their tax bills get eliminated for several years. And so if you're very pro-taxation, I say your criticism is on point. But if you're anti-taxation and you want to see a break for the middle class, then let's get solar done for your house.
There are a number of big solar projects that are going bankrupt. Mm-hmm. I know there's a difference between rooftop solar and these kind of projects. Can you tell us what's the difference?
Yeah, there were actually a handful of really sort of experimental projects that California did in the 1980s and 90s that were a different type of solar energy. So there's all different types of ways to harness the energy from the sun. Photovoltaics, rooftop solar, what we typically call rooftop solar, it's literally a no moving part box on your roof that through chemical reaction inside the solar cell, the chemicals are based on silica, which comes from sand. So it's really, really basic materials inside that black box. That is basically a technology that has now been tried and true, and there are no solar plants being torn down that are photovoltaics. Those are all working quite well. But there were some that used concentrated, what are called concentrated solar. They used mirrors out in the desert to concentrate the sun's heat, like a magnifying glass, to boil water, to turn a turbine, to generate electricity. It was a much more complicated way to harness the energy from the sun. And those projects were experimental when they were built, and they unfortunately did not withstand the test of time. And so they're being shut down. But that's maybe 1% of the America's solar market and solar industry. 99% of it is photovoltaics, which is working incredibly well. In fact, it's working better than people expected. Johnny mentioned earlier, solar panels that were built 20, 30, sometimes 40 years ago are still generating electricity today.
And one other really important thing what you had mentioned with rooftop solar is that it avoids transmission lines in most cases. So when you have rooftop solar where the power is being generated where it's being used, there's a much higher efficiency there. The further that we push power and electrons through those power lines, the more resistance we get in those lines, meaning we basically lose efficiency. We lose how much you could send 10 kilowatts from destination A. By the time it reaches destination B, maybe only 6 or 7 of those kilowatts actually make it to its end destination, depending on how far away the person is from where they're using it. And so rooftop solar and photovoltaics, which we want to really stay focused on, that right there is what's the most efficient way of being able to have your power delivered to your home. It's basically putting the power factory right on your roof and getting it just a few feet away. Almost no resistance gets in the way of those electrons making it to its end destination.
It's really interesting. On hot summer, it's 10% is lost through, it's called line losses. So whenever any electron is generated, whether it's a wind farm or a coal plant or a hydro plant or a solar plant, 10% of those electrons generated at the big giant power plant are lost on average in the transmission across lines, just again because of just physics, just the friction of an actual physical electron moving across distances. On hot days though, which is when solar works best, those line losses can go upward to 20%. So it's a really significant savings when you generate the electricity at the point of use, whether that's a parking lot over your kid's elementary school parking lot, or it's at the roof of the IKEA, or it's on your home. It's generating electricity right there in the neighborhood for immediate use, and that's right there at 20% savings. These are the types of things that didn't get factored in when the Public Utilities Commission slashed the value of rooftop solar. These are the types of examples that when we say California is not valuing this technology and valuing consumers stepping forward and putting their own money in what is essentially a shared resource, they're not doing that fairly, and they need to reevaluate that and go back to something that is more accurate, to reflective of the value of these electrons.
Before we continue with the rest of this interview, Let's take a look at some key headlines from the California section of the Epoch Times newspaper this week. California GOP is now suing the federal court to stop the redistricting that's happening now. The Supreme Court has agreed that if mail-in ballots must arrive by the election day to get counted. Right now in 18 states, including California, if you postmark your ballot on the election day, it's still going to get counted. But the Supreme Court may change everything. California drivers are now suing Uber and Lyft over gender discrimination. A while back ago, Uber decided to allow female passengers to hire female drivers. Now male drivers are saying this is gender discrimination. We're gonna see where this goes. There's been 10 school districts in Los Angeles that's been making significant changes to their fiscal ranking. Out of the 79 school districts in LA that have been ranking, 66 of them are filing their financials on time. These rankings are fascinating. It will tell you what's happening in your area, in other cities and counties. Make sure to pay attention to them. Epoch Times newspaper, we constantly are ranking different municipalities and school districts to see how they're doing financially. And this is something that you wouldn't see in any other newspaper. On top of the California stories, we also have national, international, and unique China content. Make sure to subscribe today. It's only $1 with the link below. Click on the link below and let us know what you think of the paper. Does it look like, or is it that these rooftop solar are competing directly with the utility companies? Has it become a competition with these utility companies right now?
It has. The utility companies right now are being very rational in how they're approaching rooftop solar because their whole reason for existence is to build more power lines. When they build more poles and wires and substations and all the infrastructure that it takes to deliver electrons from a faraway power plant to your home, they make money off of that. On every mile of power lines they build, they make money. They get a guaranteed upwards of 10 or more % on every dollar they spend. So it's really rational that they want to build power plants really far away from our cities because that's how they make their money. Rooftop solar inverts that whole equation, right? And it generates the electricity without the need for all of those power lines. And so they're doing something very rational and being opposed. Also, they don't want their consumers to make the product that they want to sell the consumer, right? It's pretty simple and straightforward. Where we need is the government regulators to step in and sort of moderate this problem because it's obviously in the consumer's best interest and it's in society's best interest to generate energy more efficiently. And the utilities could ultimately evolve and adapt, and they could start building infrastructure themselves that's in a distributed fashion. So for example, there's no reason that a utility couldn't put batteries scattered throughout our cities to soak up all of that surplus electricity sent back to the grid. And then they could turn around and sell it in the evening if they wanted to. So instead, they're putting that battery adoption on the backs of the consumer, which ultimately the consumer is going to benefit from that, but the utilities need to basically adapt and modernize the way they do energy. It's no longer this system that we started in the early 1900s. You build a big coal plant, nuclear power plant, hydroelectric power plant, hundreds of miles away from the city, and you transmit the power across poles and wires. That's a very 1900s way of doing things. We now have basically the internet of electricity available to us. We can decentralize how we generate it and share it amongst ourselves. Every solar system that Johnny puts in has an incredibly smart computer inside it, and that computer can tell what the electrons can tell them to stop working, to flow this way, to flow that way. We can actually wire our cities in this incredibly efficient, modern way by just investing heavily in distributed generation. But the utilities have to change the way they do things. They need to modernize.
Do you think the utility companies could work with you guys, the solar industry?
We should be seen as an ally to them because we're improving their infrastructure in a huge way. But to Bernadette's point, their incentive is essentially a construction company. They have to get incentive to their shareholders by showing constant growth. But also to add to what Bernadette said, when you're putting a power plant hundreds of miles away from its point of use, that is because they want to build those transmission lines. They want that to happen. But that is really slow to the adoption of how much power we actually need. And And one of the interesting things that we've seen in our state is even despite the use of EVs and the huge demand that's come from that, our power demand has remained pretty much the same across the board because we've been able to add so much rooftop solar to help keep those costs down. So it doesn't really matter what you think about solar if you don't even have it. We've helped keep your utility bills lower. Whether you like us or not, whether you're irritated by the guys that come to your front door and knock on it, those guys are playing an essential role in keeping your power costs lower. And so I would say that it would be nice to be able to see our utilities play a more interactive role with us. Let us know where extra power sources are needed. Let us work with you on even installing those batteries or providing consumers a fantastic solution to that, and maybe allow us to be able to not have to deal with this whack-a-mole of regulation all the time where we're constantly fighting against it. It would be great to see more cooperation because we are playing a big role for them. We've added so much power to the grid that they are in need of without them having to spend tons of money on building out expensive power plants that may be at an inefficient distance for its end use.
What should the Public Utility Commission do to actually solve this problem? You guys are suing, you're probably going to go through the courts, but is there a way to actually tackle this without the courts?
We wouldn't need to be suing if the Public Utilities Commission reoriented their thinking back to in line with 50 years of California policymaking. The Public Utilities Commission is talk about an essential resource. Consumers absolutely need a strong regulator. When we created monopoly utilities in the early 1900s, it was with the assumption, we created the monopoly and we created the government agency to regulate the monopoly at the same time. The two things go together. And if one becomes weak, the whole system gets out of whack. And so what we have seen is this Public Utilities Commission is essentially captured by the entities that they regulate. And this is where capitalism falls apart, because you have to have strong regulations within a monopoly industry, or you need to have opened it up to competition and choice. And we have neither. We are squashing the competition and choice by making what Johnny does every day more difficult, and we are not regulating the utilities. What the Public Utilities Commission is supposed to do is scrutinize what the utilities are wanting to spend their money on. So the utilities come to them every year, every couple of years, and they say, we need to spend X amount of money on Y infrastructure. The Public Utilities Commission, for the most part, they will tinker around on the edges, but they mostly just rubber stamp it. And they say, okay, go ahead and spend it. I guess you know what's best. And there's no auditing. We spend billions and billions of dollars on the electric grid every year, and no government agency goes back and checks receipts. We never go back and say, did you really need to spend $1 billion on that one particular system? Did you spend it? How did you spend it? What is it doing now? Is it performing the way we wanted it to? There's no such scrutiny. So where does the accountability come in, right? Where's the people, what kind of voice do the people have in this system? It's really been eroded by a combination of sort of the regulator being captured and not being strong enough to stand up to the monopoly, and then the politicians being funded by the utility. The utility kind of has captured both branches of government, which is what's forced us to the courts.
You mentioned that the power hasn't increased, the need for power, but we do have this revolution in AI in California especially. A lot of data centers, they need power. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if we want to create an AI that is less likely to become pernicious and antagonistic to humanity, we need to find ways to power that AI that is not on the same system that you use to turn your lights on in your own home. That's where there's going to be a direct conflict of interest. If there is an AI that currently becomes more intelligent than humanity or finds its way to get onto our internet access and into our grid, that's a really dangerous situation. I mean, if the AI has to prioritize its existence over running rolling brownouts over a city, it's going to make a very clear decision to keep its own existence alive. It would be no different than you deciding whether or not you're going to feed your child or if you're going to feed someone else's. And so we want to make sure that our alignment is correct. People need to have their own power sources, their own battery backups, because any system that is shared with AI is going to create a direct competition. We don't want our AI systems being in competition with your everyday American. That's a very dangerous incentive program. And so right now, like that's a big component of why people are even getting solar. I even talked to them. There's a growing awareness that, wow, we are seeing our utility costs go up, water rights being sucked up by these large companies. And in some states across the country, we've already seen a direct impact on those communities where they're having a hard time getting clean running water, where their utility costs have almost tripled because the same power plants that are providing electricity for you to charge your car, keep your fridge cool, all of those things are the same power sources that are powering these data centers.
I also think it's important, these are such good points, and that's a much higher level point that I'm going to make here, but I'm going to bring it down to just dollars and cents in the California grid. There's a couple of stories right now circulating in the news that building data centers and suddenly adding a huge increase in electricity demand on the grid can lower prices. It's this notion of you can achieve economies of scale if you suddenly put forget that it's AI, just a big giant paper mill right in the middle of a community. That paper mill is going to use tons and tons of electricity, and the utility can go out and build an extra big power plant and through economies of scale, lower the price for everybody. This was kind of the economics of electricity in the 1950s. We are in 2025, and especially in California, it is a completely different scenario. We have achieved diseconomies of scale. The more we build, the more the price goes up. So if we're going to suddenly plop data centers and AI in the middle of California's electric grid, that is not going to reduce the cost of electricity. That is going to put an unsustainable burden on an already fragile and tested to its limits electric grid. And the more we build, the more the cost is going to go up. Demand is going to outpace supply, which is going to cause prices to go up. We're in an affordability crisis. This is the last thing we should be doing. So anybody that wants to bring a data center, any other super large source of demand for electricity, they need to come bringing their own bag lunch. They should come with their own electricity sources or come up with a different way than just relying on the electric grid that the rest of us rely on, or we're going to see our current electricity affordability crisis get 1,000 times worse than it is today. To say nothing of the planetary limits and impacts of building too many power plants too quickly.
We're going to follow up and see how the rooftop solar is doing in California after your efforts. Johnny and Bernadette, it was great to have you on California Insider.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Let us know what you think about the situation with solar in California. You can always email us at siyamak@californiainsider.com or comment. We read all of your emails and comments. I'm Siyamak Karami. This is California Insider. We'll see you next time.